Billions in dirty money have been stolen from South Africa and funneled into bank accounts across the globe. Illicit cash from multiple criminal enterprises moves through our porous borders. And terrorists use crime in South Africa to raise funds for their operations overseas. Across the world, secret trillions from crime are a threat to democracies. The watchdog to clean up this global financial crime is based in Paris, and it's called the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF for short. We signed up as part of our commitment to prevent financial crime, but we failed to live up to our promise, and now FATF have put us on their grey list.
If you think about FATF, there's 200 countries that FATF investigates. 23 of those countries are now on the grey list.
The grey list is an international indicator that we really need to clean up our act. It's bad for our reputation and our bottom line. So government, led by Treasury, tried till the last moment to stop it. Ismail Momoniat leads the state's team.
And we've got few successes, if any, up to now. And so if you take a step back, we shouldn't be surprised we're grey-listed. And what the world is saying is that we are well below par compared to other countries internationally.
To stay off the grey list, we were given 67 recommended actions in 2021. But by February this year, we were unable to tick all the boxes.
In other words, you had to pass a test where you had to pass 100%. Just failing one of them or not doing as well as they expect meant that we would be grey-listed.
Included in the FATF's 67 shortcomings was South Africa's approach to terrorism and terror financing. Terrorism expert Professor Hussein Solomon.
And this is why FATF was perfectly right after numerous warnings and very explicit warnings of what South Africa should do. South Africa is very good at passing legislation, but they're very poor in terms of following it up, in terms of enforcing it, and in terms of resourcing the particular agencies to conduct the investigations necessary for successful convictions in these cases.
Terrorists, says Solomon, exploit our weak criminal justice system and have used kidnapping and extortion to fund their terror from South Africa.
There's been various cases where South African prosecution services, police, have demonstrated gross incompetency in terms of their investigations. And that makes us the laughing stock of the world in terms of counterterrorism. And also, FATF has actually said one of the areas we can improve on is assistance with extradition. And the South Africans have been unwilling to assist in this area.
The FATF were unimpressed with our anti-terrorist interventions, but it was state capture that ultimately landed us on the grey list.
The alarm bells that should have rung in the early days of state capture should also be ringing now. The game is not over yet. We're not even at half-time.
Paul Pretorius is a former evidence leader at the State Capture Commission.
Far beyond the scope of the FATF, ordinary organized crime is even more frightening today than it was then. And it's that realization that scares me, and I'm speaking out because of that concern.
A concern confirmed by the FATF. In response, South Africa began tightening up existing laws dealing with money laundering, terror financing, and corruption.
We need to bring our laws up to speed. And that was what we did last year, okay? And that's really the easy part, changing the law.
But our failure to pursue serious cases successfully put us firmly on the list.
I was disappointed, but looking back objectively, it was always going to be an almost impossible exercise to prevent greylisting. And we've really knuckled it down now to 8 strategic areas.
91, a global investment company, has analyzed these 8 strategic deficiencies from the FATF. Sangeeth Sewnath is Deputy Managing Director.
There's 8 conditions that we need to now resolve. 5 of those 8 conditions is about prosecution. 2 is about law changes. 1 is about terrorist financing. We need to address all 8, not 7. That will help us get off greylisting and will have a massive impact on the longer term implications if we don't get off that grey list.
The Treasury DG has no illusions that it was state capture that put us on the list.
If you want to really get to deal with corruption or money laundering, you're dealing with criminal syndicates. And you really need to have very specialized ways to deal with criminal syndicates, who in many cases tend to be politically connected.
At Business Leadership South Africa, greylisting came as no surprise. Executive Director Busi Mavuso.
You can be implicated in the State Capture Commission and you can still be a minister in this country.
And President Ramaphosa's response was that greylisting was concerning, but less dire than some suggest.
I was listening to the president the other day saying that South Africans don't have to worry because then it doesn't impact the average man on the street. He couldn't have been more wrong. I don't know whether that is a function of him trying to bring hope in a hopeless situation or whether he really believes that. I'm hoping that it is the former, because if it is the latter, then we're in serious trouble.
A recent Al Jazeera expose on money laundering between Southern Africa and Dubai implicated several South African banks. But the Banking Association says the FATF has given our banks the green light.
If you are working through banks, your interactions, your investments, your business is not going to be impacted at this stage.
Banking Association MD Bongiwe Kunene.
The verdict says that South African banking systems are robust enough. The knowledge of clients is at an international standard acceptable. It also says that the risk assessments that banks have been doing on their own business are often acceptable standards.
But expect more red tape, says Ruan Breed from Brenthurst Wealth.
Administrative burdens, compliance burdens. That's going to be the flavor of the day going forward until we're basically off the grey list.
Their office in Mauritius has just been through greylisting.
They scrutinize everything from top to bottom, every pay slip, bank account statements, source of funds for every credit they see on your bank account to ensure there's no money laundering involved and that the money that you're working with is clean at the end of the day.
So there is no time to waste. South Africa needs to get off this list.
The expectation is that, again, if it stays on for a long period of time, it'll have an impact on the currency, it'll have an impact on the capital borrowing costs. But if it gets off the list fairly quickly, hopefully it has a very minimal impact.
President Ramaphosa has set an investment target of 2 trillion rands by 2030. But a business leadership study shows greylisting could wipe out 1 to 3% of our GDP.
You can't think that the residents of Alexander are going to continue to look at the opulence of sent in from the windows of their shacks. At some point, poverty, hunger, helplessness, hopelessness will drive them out of their shacks to cross the M1 bridge and render Sandton ungovernable. And that is what we actually have to manage. Investment matters from that perspective. So greylisting is not a peripheral issue. It matters. It is a big deal.
Greylisting could also mean some countries simply won't want our investments.
There are examples where countries could decide that actually it's just not worth the effort, and so we're not accepting any investment by South African investors into that country. That's the more kind of medium-term to short-term impact. So we haven't seen that unfold just yet.
And the FATF wants to see major overhauls at our borders to prevent false or undeclared cross-border currency movements.
And remember, it's for money going out the country. Money coming into the country, in theory, has very little additional requirements at this stage.
The architects of state capture hid their wealth through letterbox companies that made it difficult for investigators to find the real beneficiaries of financial crime. The FATF calls this beneficial ownership.
Financial crime especially is hugely complex. I'm not sure that we are out of the age of the deer stalker and magnifying glass. It requires highly sophisticated, highly trained, specialized personnel and equipment.
But this knowledge of the beneficial owner is one of the 8 non-negotiable conditions to get off the list.
Beneficial ownership is going to be a difficult one for us to meet. It's also part of one of the 8 requirements, but getting a history of beneficial ownership for everything that's already gone through the enhanced due diligence process is going to be significant. It's going to take a lot of time and effort, but we've got to get it right to make sure that we show progress and get off that grey list.
Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana is optimistic we can get off the grey list by 2024. His DG is more realistic.
Look, it's going to be tough to get out in a year, but I think it's doable in a year or a year and a half. FATF gives us, by the way, 2 years. So it's not like it can go beyond that.
But it's not that easy, as the case of Mauritius recently demonstrated.
You know, the commitment from Mauritius was, we've got to work 6 days a week here to resolve and get off this grey list. They had a team that spent, every day from 9 to 6 or 7 at night working through the requirements and resolving it. So the lesson is that we've got to be committed from a government perspective, and government's got to work together with financial services to help solve this problem.
In April 2023, the Financial Intelligence Center took the first step and established a shared state forensic capability. It's a game changer, they claim, in the fight against financial crime.
And the wording that FATF uses is they want to see a sustained increase, in investigations, in prosecutions, whether it's for money laundering or terror financing. And clearly those are going to be the real challenge.
We've got to show that we've met those 8 conditions, but if we don't, then we have serious issues. So can those all be done? And you've got to get 8, you can't get 7. Can those all 8 be done in 18 months? I'm a bit uncertain. I think if government's committed to doing it, we've got to see the arrests, we've got to see the prosecutions coming through, and then hopefully we can get off it.
But we haven't started well. The Guptas, the alleged architects of state capture, accused of looting and laundering billions from state-owned companies, have just evaded extradition from Dubai, and implicated politicians still remain in office.
In effect, any government operation, and it's fair of the public, and that's where I sit, to judge it by outcomes. And if you look at the outcomes and you judge by outcomes, unsuccessful. Something is wrong, something is not being done. It's the government responsibility to sit down and provide comprehensive analysis of what's going on and put in place the machinery to deal with it. And that is not being done.
And here are the FATF 8 strategic deficiencies summarized. Until we comply, expect additional due diligence as many more businesses become accountable institutions and the FIC flexes its regulatory muscle. For the foreseeable future, South African citizens must expect more checks, longer transaction times, and higher costs as the economy contracts further.